Ygra, Eater of All, is a 5 mana 6/6 Golgari commander with the following abilities. Ward, sacrifice a food. Other creatures are food artifacts, in addition to their other types, and have 2 tap and sacrifice this permanent to gain 3 life. And whenever a food is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put 2+1/+1 counters on Ygra, Eater of All. So, it turns everything into artifacts and gets real big, real fast. What can we do with that? Well, the way I built it is a classic token sacrifice frame that takes advantage of Ygra's ability to turn everything into an artifact that can be sacrificed. Let's start with the token producers. Any aristocrat's deck needs its token producers, and we want as many tokens as possible. To do this, we're playing a bunch of token makers that can repeatedly generate them. Let's start with Bitter Blossom, a classic 2 mana enchantment that simply creates 1/1/1 flyer on our upkeep in exchange for 1 life. Tendershoot Dryad is a 5 mana 2/2 Dryad that will create a token each upkeep, including our opponents, and will buff them to 3/3s if we have the City's Blessing. Beledro's Witherbloom is similar, and that it also creates a token on each upkeep that gains you 1 life when it dies, but it can also serve as a huge mana boost by letting you pay 10 life to untap all lands you control. Scurry of Squirrels is a 3 mana 2/2 squirrel with 2 instances of Myriad, meaning that it will create 4 tokens each combat, assuming you have 3 opponents. It can also buff up your creatures, which is nice, but we mostly care about the tokens. Chittering Dispatcher is similar in that it's a 3 mana 2/3 Eldrazi that also has Myriad, and when it leaves, it creates a 0/1 spawn token, which we can sacrifice for 1 generic mana. Meaning it can also create 4 tokens each turn, and ramp us while it does it. Then, Cyberman Squadron is an insane artifact creature that gives Myriad to all our non-legendary artifact creatures. It does cost 7 mana, but with our commander out, that means all of our creatures. So, since they're artifact food in addition to the other types, that means all our creatures will have Myriad, which is going to give us a bunch of tokens to sacrifice and beat our opponents with. If we have even 5 1/1 tokens, this is going to immediately give us 10 more, which is crazy good. Parallel Lives is a classic 4 mana enchantment that doubles any tokens we would make, which is perfect for a token deck. Chatterfang is a 3 mana scroll that also acts as a token doubler, but it gives us 1/1 scrolls instead of extra copies of the tokens we would create. It can also sacrifice X number of scrolls to give any creature plus X minus X, which allows it to also act as an interaction and a sacrifice outlet. Peregrine Took is a 3 mana 2/3 halfling that isn't quite a doubler, but if we would make any number of tokens, it also creates an additional food token. It also allows us to sacrifice 3 food to draw a card, so with our commander in play, it can also act as a sacrifice outlet that draws us cards, since our commander turns our creatures into food. Here we have 2 cards that give us tokens when our non-token creatures die. Pawn of Ulamog is a 3 mana 2/2 vampire that gives us a spawn token which we can sack for mana whenever one of our non-token creatures die. And the Skullspore Nexus is an 8 mana legendary artifact that has Dispel, costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And whenever one or more non-token creature you control die, create a green fungus dinosaur creature token with base power and toughness each equal to the total power of those creatures. It can even double target creature's power until end of turn by paying 2 and tapping it. So since our commander is a 6/6 base, this means it's basically just gonna be 2 mana, which is a pretty good right. Curious Herd. Simple 4 mana instant that gives us a 3/3 beast for each artifact target opponent controls. Since Ygra turns all creatures into artifacts, this means it's gonna be 7 or more 3/3s for 4 mana very often. That's a really good right. Finally, we have Guillaume, Master Chef, which is a 4 mana 5/3 troll with trample and has, at the beginning of your end step, create a number of food tokens, each equal to the number of non-token creatures you had entered the battlefield under your control this turn, and pay 1 and sacrifice a food. Target creature gains indestructible until end of turn and tap it. This means it allows us to protect our commander and act as another cheaper sacrifice outlet. Speaking of which, we have some more. Of course, our commander is a sack outlet, but since we have to pay 2 mana per creature and they also can't suffer from summoning sickness, that's not so great. So it's pretty important that we can do this more efficiently. First, we have the trio Fraction Altar, Ashness Altar, and Krark-Clan Ironworks, which are all artifacts that allow us to turn our creatures into mana. Krark-Clan Ironworks actually allows us to sacrifice any artifact, which can be handy when we create food tokens, for example. So instead of paying 2 mana with something like Krark-Clan Ironworks, it actually gives us 2 mana, which is basically a difference of 4 mana. Yeah, that's a pretty big difference. Yawgmoth, Frown Physician, is a 4 mana 2/4 human cleric with protection from humans, and, more importantly, pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, put a 1/1 -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature, and draw a card. This is a great value engine that can even kill our opponent's creatures while doing so. Cordova Forge Master is a 5 mana 3/5 artifact creature that allows us to sacrifice 3 of our artifacts to search our library for any artifact we want, which can be something like our Cyberman's Quadrant, any number of value engines we have in the deck, or even a way to untap this and to do it even more times, as long as we have the artifacts to spare. This is the last time I'll remind you that our commander turns anything we have, or all our creatures, into artifacts. So that's going to be pretty easy. Value. Like any commander deck, we want to draw cards, and we're going to do that for our Aristocrats theme. First, we have Moldavine Reclamation, which is a 5 mana enchantment that draws us a card and gains us 1 life whenever any of our creatures die. Morbid Opportunist is a 3 mana 1/3 human rogue that draws us a card when any creature dies on anyone's board, but does it only once each turn. And Liliana Dreadhorde General is a 6 mana planeswalker that also draws us cards when any of our creatures die, whilst also being able to create more tokens. And it has an edict effect that makes each player sacrifice 2 creatures. Let's say we do this while we have our commander out. That means Ygra can get up to 16 +1 counters, which is already enough to kill anyone with our creatures with commander damage. We also have Savvy Hunter, a 3 mana 3/3 that creates a food token whenever it attacks all blocks, and is similar to Peregrine Took in that it allows us to sacrifice 2 food to draw a card. Trail of Crumbs is a 2 mana enchantment that creates a food when it enters, and it has, whenever we sacrifice a food, we may pay 1 generic mana to look at the top 2, reveal a permanent card from among them, and put the other on the bottom of our library. Then, Viridian Revel is a 3 mana enchantment and an auto-include in any Ygra deck, because it has, whenever an artifact is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, we may draw a card, which is of course going to apply to opponent's creatures. Braids, Arisen Nightmare, is a 3 mana 3/3 that's just a solid value in almost any deck, because it has, at the beginning of our end step, we may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker, and if we do, each opponent may also sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and we draw a card. So if we sacrifice an artifact, or opponent doesn't have one, we can draw up to 3 cards. The Great Henge, classic staple. With our commander, this is usually just going to be free, because it's immediately going to tap for 2 mana, and it only costs 2 mana. Since it's a 9 mana artifact, that also costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. And additionally, it's just a great value engine, because whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. Next are some cards I couldn't cleanly put into any category. First we have Lightning Greaves. You know, they give haste and shroud. Our deck is pretty commander centric, so we want to protect our commander. Brotherhood Regalia is another equipment that protects our commander by giving him an additional ward 2 and destroy that makes him unblockable. This is pretty great, since our commander is easily going to be big enough to kill people with commander damage. Shadow Spear also lets our commander get through by giving a trample, while also getting a ton of life through giving lifelink. Okay, I will always want to have some graveyard hate in my decks, and a card that has impressed me in any deck I put it in is Ygra's Soul Cauldron. It has, you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activate abilities of all creature cards exiled with Ygra's Soul Cauldron, and tap, exile target card from a graveyard, and when a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. If this doesn't impress you, I urge you to try it out in any deck. Any deck! It has never been a dead card to me, and on the contrary, there's usually someone who either has a mana dog or better in the graveyard, or makes use of the graveyard in a way that a cauldron can easily disrupt, and is usually a pretty big threat at the table. In our deck, we have some great mana dogs coming up, but we've already seen stuff like Kuldova Forge Master or Beledra's Witherbloom, which work great with the cauldron. Then we have Hazel's Brewmaster, which is basically Ygra's Soul Cauldron, but on steroids. It's a 4 mana 3/4 squirrel that exiles a card from a graveyard whenever it enters or attacks, and creates a food token when it does. And it gives all of food any activate abilities of any creature cards exiled with it. This is great, even if the best thing is just a random Lanoa elf. Oh, and it has menace for some reason. So there's always going to be someone you're going to be able to attack with it. Continuing on, we have Myriad Apprentice, a 2 mana 1/2 human, which can make a 1/1 token when it enters, and whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. This can be a cheap and quick way to deal a ton of damage in the right circumstances. Vat of Rebirth is a 1 mana artifact, with whenever another artifact or creature you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put an order counter on it. And then for 3 mana, and tap and remove 4 of those order counters. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield and activate only as a sorcery. This is a cheap and easy way to keep recurring our important creatures. Finally, Sculpting Steel is a fun little artifact in our deck, as it's a 3 mana artifact that can enter as a copy of any artifact on the battlefield, meaning it can become any artifact or creature currently in play. Finally, we have Cauldron Familiar, a 1 mana 1/1 cat with, when Cauldron Familiar enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And sacrifice a food, return Cauldron Familiar from the graveyard to the battlefield. It's not really a sack outlet, as it requires another sack outlet to really work, but it's one of the best cards in the deck, as it can essentially double any of a creature's deaths for free. Let's say we have a squirrel on the field, and this is in the graveyard, and a card that draws a card with something dies. Now, we can sacrifice our squirrel to the familiar, drawing a card, and sacrifice the familiar itself. This not only nets us an extra card, but also drains opponents whenever we do recur the kitty. Ramp, most likely needed. Of course, we're in Sol Ring. We also run Jiraga Tree Speaker, which is like a slower creature version of Sol Ring, but still really good. Then take some mana dogs, use these or pick your favorites. Arbor Elf and the 2 1 mana enchantments that allow a land to tap for additional mana. These are all great cards, and I play the enchantments in basically any green deck I build, since they don't even cost mana the turn you play them, assuming you can play them on an untapped land. The enchantments are also great with Earthcraft, a 2 mana enchantment that lets us tap any of our creatures to untap a basic land. This card is obviously insane in any token deck, and one of the best cards in ours. Inspiring Statuary is a 3 mana artifact that does its best Earthcraft impression by allowing us to tap our artifacts to pay for generic mana of non-artifact spells. Note that both Earthcraft and the Statuary don't care if creatures being tapped have summoning sickness or not. Steve, or Sakura's Tribe Elder, is a 2 mana creature that sacks itself to let us search for a basic land and put it into play. Especially the sacking part is nice for this deck. Fourfold Forager is a 2 mana scroll that can either tap for 1 green mana or for 2 mana in any combination by sacrificing a food or exiling 3 cards from our graveyard. You can also pay 4 to tutor for a scroll, I guess, which we do have a couple of. Our best mana dogs are these two, Fanatic of Ronus is a 2 mana 1/4 snake that can tap for a green mana or for 4 green mana if we have a creature with power 4 or greater. It can even come back from the graveyard once by paying 4 mana. And then Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, is a 3 mana 2/3 with whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power, which is nice with our 6/6, but it's mostly for the pay 1 green, tap it, add X mana in any combination of colors, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Yeah, it's not rare for a commander to have 20 or more power, and I don't think I have to tell you how insane it is to tap a mana dog for 20 or more mana. This is Clock of Omens, a pretty cool card our commander enables, which is a 4 mana artifact that lets us tap 2 of our untapped artifacts to untap target artifact, which is just a Llanowar elf. This acts as a half power Earthcraft, which is still really good as it ignores Summoning Sickness. But throw in something like Fanatic or Ronus or Selvala and this just goes crazy. Interaction. Our deck has a lot of interaction and it's specific to our deck, being an artifact or aristocrats deck. Because it's an aristocrats deck, we can run Grave Pacts and Dictate of Erebos, which are both enchantments with whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifice which are both enchantments with whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. This can be absolutely back-breaking, so you might want to ask your playgroup if they're okay with these. Then we have just a bunch of removal that can get rid of artifacts and enchantments, and by extension, creatures. Nature's Claim is a 1 mana instant that destroys target artifact or enchantment but gains the owner 4 life, which is trivial. Crossing Grip does it for 3 mana but has placed second, and Tear Asunder does it for 2 mana but exiles and can get rid of anything by paying an additional 2 mana for the kicker cost. Druid of Purification is the best Reclamation Sage in the game right now, and it's even better in our deck. It's a 4 mana 2/3 with, when it enters, starting with you, each player may choose an artifact or enchantment you don't control. Destroy each permanent chosen this way. This means you don't even have to declare a target before it resolves, and usually ends up killing 4 of your opponent's permanents. Yeah, you might think your opponents will conspire to not kill each other's stuff, but this has not been my experience, unless you're obviously the arch enemy, and then, even then, it's just a 4 mana Rex Sage that can hit creatures, which isn't the worst thing ever. Pest Infestation is a sorcery that can blow up a bunch of stuff while making tokens, obviously great in our deck. And Wear Down is a 2 mana sorcery that can hit 2 artifacts or enchantments by just giving one of our opponents a card. We also want to protect our commander since it's so important, and these cards can do so whilst also killing something else. Legolas Quick Reflexes is a 1 mana instant with split second and untap target creature. Until end of turn it gains hexproof, reach, and whenever the creature becomes tapped, it deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature. So it protects our commander while being able to kill a creature if it attacks. And then we have Imp's Mischief, a 2 mana instant that lets us change the target of any spell in exchange for losing an amount of life equal to its mana value. And finally we have Collective Restraint, which is a 2 mana instant with Escalate Green, so we can pay an additional green for each mode chosen beyond first. And then we choose 1 or more, destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, and target creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Okay, finally, Sign of Calamity is a 5 mana 5/5 dinosaur with Myriad, and whenever Sign of Calamity deals combat damage to player, destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. Then we have Wicked Wolf, a 4 mana 3/3 with, when it enters, it fires up to 1 target creature you don't control, and sacrifice a food, put a +1 counter on Wicked Wolf, it gains indestructible until end of turn, and tap it. Which means it's creature removal that can also act as a sack outlet that can gain indestructible. Finally, we have Orcus Bowmasters, a 2 mana 1/1 with Flash, and when it enters, and whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, Orcus Bowmasters deals 1 damage to any target, then Amass Orc 1. This is already a staple, but on our deck, this card becomes even more nuts. Amassing usually just make your amass token bigger, but if we would amass, we can sacrifice the token in response, which will instead have us create a new amass token, which we can sack for even more value. Lands, every deck needs them. We're playing 35 of them. First, pick your 24 favorite Golgari flavored lands. I don't care which. There's so many good ones in the game right now, it doesn't really matter. You're only playing 2 colors. You just make sure to play enough basics so Earthcraft doesn't become a dead card. Then we're playing Urza Saga, which is a way to get soaring after 2 turns. Obviously really good. You can also get Shadow Spear if you need it. 3 of Tails and Vault of Whispers are the Golgari artifact lands, which have some synergy on our deck with cards like Cloak of Omens and Cordova Forge Master. The next 6 lands all tap for colorless. Inventor's Fair also has, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. And 4 tap, sacrifice it, search your library for an artifact, put it into your hand and shuffle, and activate only if you control 3 or more artifacts. Memory Vault can let you dig through your deck with its ability for free tap and discard a card. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Put one of them in your hand and the rest in the bottom. Then we have Mighty of Gardens, which can become a copy of target non-token artifact you control with mana value X by paying X and tapping it. Reliquary Tower, land, you don't really need it, you shouldn't really play it, unless you're greedy like me. Rogue's Passage is a land that can let us get our commander through for lethal, even through clock boards. And it can also get a creature with Myriad through, should there be no safe attacks. Tower of the Magistrate is a lesser known card that can give any creature protection from artifacts. Let me remind you that protection offers, this can't be blocked, targeted, dealt damage, enchanted or equipped by any artifact. So, since our opponent's creature will be artifacts, this also grants unblockable for just 1 mana. But it can even remove equipment from our opponent's creatures, which is pretty cool in my opinion. Finally, Spymaster's Vault, another land that can really dig for a deck. It has it enters tapped unless you control a swamp, which isn't too difficult. It taps for black, and it has black tap target creature control can over X, where X is the number of creatures that died this turn. Boseiju is a staple in any green deck, but now in our deck it can even grow creatures for just 1 mana. And that's the deck. I hope you found this informative, but before we wrap up, some notable exclusions. Cards I didn't put in for various reasons that you might see on EDH Rec. Stuff like Academy Manufacturer. This card actually doesn't have any interaction whatsoever with our commander. If we would make a 1/1 squirrel with this and our commander out, we just make the squirrel, nothing more, even though it's technically a food. This is because the squirrel isn't a food because it's already on the battlefield, at which point it's already been created. And then we have a bunch of cards that just go infinite too easily for my casual games. All of these cards go infinite with Ygra and a sack outlet, which is too easy in my opinion. Voltaic Construct goes infinite with Ygra and a big dork like Zavala for infinite mana, and Pitiless Plunderer and 1 Soul Trader both go infinite with Chatterfang. Force of Vigor is probably the best piece of interaction you can play, but I tend to shy away from these kind of free interaction spells. Of course, if your play group is different, everyone's play group is different, so feel free to put any of these in your deck, they're really good. For the sake of brevity, I'm ending the video here. Of course, there's a bunch more exclusions, but thanks for watching.